This is the story of my solo journey by canoeing on foot through the remote wilderness of Glen Affric in the northwest Highlands of Scotland. This glen is widely regarded as one of the most beautiful in the country. It's home to an important remnant of the ancient pine forest that once covered much of the Scottish Highlands. This is a land of forest, loch, river, bog and mountain. My goal was to journey up through the glen over the course of several days to ultimately climb one of the great remote and inaccessible mountains of Scotland. Two weeks earlier, I'd just finished working on the dissertation for a part-time degree I'd been doing for almost 10 years. With that submitted, I now yearned for a trip to the mountains to renew my soul and to hit the reset button. The plan for this trip was to canoe the two lochs in the glen, first Loch Benavane and then Loch Affric. I would then stash my canoe and continue on foot along the Affric Kintail Way, one of Scotland's best long-distance footpaths. This would take me to the upper reaches of the glen, where I aimed to climb Sgurr Caravan, a remote and hard-to-get-to mountain much prized by hill walkers and mountaineers. So on Tuesday morning, I threw my gear in the van, put my canoe on the roof, and made the journey from my home in Dunbar in southeast Scotland to the Scottish Highlands. The weather forecast for the next few days was for mostly fine weather, interspersed with the occasional front that would bring cloudier and potentially wetter weather. By the time I reached the western end of the loch, the first of those fronts had come through, an ominous sign of what I would experience later in the trip. I now faced my first major challenge in the form of the river that connects the two lochs. Outflanking this obstacle required a grueling 5-hour portage through the surrounding forest. I was eventually able to relaunch on Loch Affric itself. As I approached the western end of Loch Affric, the front passed and the weather cleared, giving me a pleasant evening. I'd now paddled as far as I reasonably could, so I stashed my non-essential and my paddling gear under my canoe. Taking only a light pack, I set off on foot up the glen to complete my journey to the mountain. As I reached the ridge that would lead me to my destination, it began to rain. The next weather front was coming through. I was now in a race against time to get up the mountain and down to the loch where I'd planned to spend the night. My spirits lifted as I finally got sight of Sgurr Caravan, my ultimate goal, and after another hour of walking, I arrived at the east summit of the mountain. The weather was deteriorating fast, and I knew I needed to get down to my camp as quickly as possible. I stopped to film only once on my descent down the ridge, but now I could see the loch far down below me. As the evening drew in, it started to pour down in earnest, and I fell asleep to the sound of rain on my tent. The next morning, the weather had not improved. I ate a hasty breakfast and broke camp. My goal now was to head over the west summit of the mountain and back down to Glen Affric and my canoe. On reaching the west summit, I marvelled at the sensation of being above the clouds, and the views across to the east summit that I'd climbed the previous evening were simply sublime. The challenge now would be to descend the southern flank of the mountain through the cloud layer to reach the glen. This would need good navigation and a steady nerve. It was with some relief that I broke through the clouds and saw the glen below me, the bright ribbon of the River Affric seeming to guide me down. The conditions in the glen were a world away from what I'd experienced up on the mountain, and I took the time to eat a leisurely second breakfast before setting off back down the glen to be reunited with my paddling gear. The increased winds brought by the change in the weather had whipped up some significant waves on the loch, which would make paddling more difficult. I lashed down my gear in the canoe and changed it into my kayaking wetsuit just in case I experienced a capsize. By keeping close to shore and ducking in and out of bays, I was able to safely negotiate the conditions on the loch. As with most multi-day trips of this kind, starting out on the last leg of the journey was a bittersweet experience. One half of me looking forward to being home and seeing my family, and the other half not wanting to leave this place. These thoughts came to me as I paddled the last few miles of the loch, and they reminded me of the words of the late great Kazakh mountaineer Anatoly Bukriev. The mountains are not stadiums where I satisfy my ambition to achieve. They are the cathedrals where I practice my religion. From their lofty summits I view the past, dream of the future, and with unusual acuity I am allowed to experience the present moment. My strength renewed, my vision cleared, in the mountains I celebrate creation, for on each journey I am reborn.